Welcome to the debate. Hidden heroes. Did espionage truly win the war? Today, we analyze the ideas from the book The Silent Front. And at its core, the premise of this material is deeply compelling, right? We are examining the clandestine conflict of the Second World War.
Right, the war fought through sabotage, signals intelligence, and psychological warfare.
Exactly, all executed by highly unconventional individuals. But we are taking a radically different approach today. We're not just going to dissect these events as historical artifacts.
No, we are evaluating the core methodologies. Things like strategic deception, extreme compartmentalization, and rigorous trust verification. And we're treating them as active live proposals.
Yes, we're asking the central question: should these extreme silent front tactics be adopted as a framework for surviving and thriving in today's most high-stakes, adversarial, and competitive personal and professional environments? So from here on out, we are treating these methodologies as practical strategies that are on the table for our modern lives. I'll state my position clearly from the outset. I think adopting these clandestine methods for practical life challenges is, well, deeply flawed. Operating with an adaptive identity, running constant counterintelligence on your own peers, and embracing extreme compartmentalization carries unacceptable psychological risks. It leads to profound isolation and a fractured sense of self. We really have to ask if it is even realistic to live in a constant state of operational security, and whether doing so just destroys a person's baseline ability to function in a collaborative society.
And I look at this landscape completely differently. I believe these methods are unparalleled tools for practical efficiency and resilience in modern adversarial environments. The logic behind decentralized networks and strategic deception provides a transformative framework. Let's be honest, we are living in a highly competitive, often cutthroat world. By adopting the precise, rigorous frameworks developed in the crucible of absolute conflict, like turning personal vulnerabilities into strategic advantages or neutralizing threats before they materialize, you don't destroy your life, you protect it. You ensure operational longevity and gain an undeniable edge over competitors who are, quite frankly, still playing by conventional, predictable rules.
Okay, so let's actually look at what that means in practice, starting with the concept of the adaptive identity matrix. The proposal here is that in a highly competitive environment, you never present a single static version of yourself. Instead, you continuously shift personas based on the mission and the threat level. The historical blueprint here is Virginia Hall, operating in occupied France. She didn't just, use a fake name. She constructed entirely new lived realities, like the elderly Madame Dumez, to constantly confuse intelligence networks.
She is the absolute masterclass in modern adaptability. Virginia Hall was actively hunted by the Gestapo, who knew her as the Limping Lady. She had a prosthetic leg that she literally named Cuthbert.
Right, she named her wooden leg.
Exactly. Now, in a conventional framework, a severe physical limitation like that is a crippling vulnerability. But by utilizing an adaptive identity matrix, she took the exact thing that should have been a massive weakness and wielded it like a shield. She leaned into it to reinforce her elusive image, which generated actual fear among her adversaries and inspired her allies. Think about how empowering that is if you're the underdog in a modern business negotiation or a volatile corporate environment. The ability to fluidly adapt your persona, to completely lean into perceived weaknesses and weaponize them, provides incredible operational longevity. It keeps your adversaries constantly guessing. You aren't just reacting to threats, you are proactively shaping how the environment perceives you.
I hear the tactical appeal of that, absolutely. But what are the actual long-term costs of that constant performance? We have staggering data on the personal toll this kind of existence takes. Living behind a constructed identity, even if you're doing it for the sake of professional survival or gaining a strategic advantage, systematically erodes the boundaries of your authentic self. You are talking about operational longevity, but the psychological result of constantly shifting your persona is profound loneliness, severe survivor's guilt, and an eventual inability to reintegrate into normal social structures. It demands an almost superhuman psychological discipline where one slip of the mask ruins the facade. In a practical, modern context, Treating your professional or personal life as a continuous covert operation is a corrosive acid to mental health. You eventually lose track of who you actually are.
You call it a corrosive acid. I call it creating a necessary firewall. You really have to consider the alternative in a truly adversarial environment, which is being a static target. Yes, maintaining an adaptive identity requires immense psychological fortitude. It requires you to compartmentalize your fear and cultivate a heavily guarded internal world. But that discipline is exactly what shields you from the profound damage of being outmaneuvered, exploited, or destroyed by your competitors. It's not about losing yourself. It's about protecting your core self behind a highly functional strategic barrier.
But at what cost? If you win the corporate battle but can no longer figure out who you are when you go home to your family because you're so used to managing your persona, did you really win? And more importantly, that firewall inevitably extends to the people you actually rely on. Which brings us to the structuring of your life and relationships using decentralized command and control, and specifically, the trust vigilance cycle. The strategy dictates that you should organize your networks into compartmentalized cells where nodes have limited knowledge of each other, constantly running active monitoring and subtle testing on your own people.
Because it is a phenomenally robust system for preventing a catastrophic collapse. Look at the mechanics of the trust vigilance cycle. You don't just blindly trust your partners, your vendors, or your employees. You run an initial assessment, categorize information sensitivity, and then you move into active monitoring, watching for deviations in behavioral patterns. You implement verification testing. You plant controlled misinformation, commonly known as canary traps, to see where leaks occur.
Setting traps for your own team.
It mirrors the XX Committee, Britain's intelligence branch that literally turned captured German spies into a network of double agents. They cross-referenced intelligence, monitored communications, and turned betrayal into a strategic advantage. If a node in your network proves unreliable, the decentralized structure means they only have access to a tiny compartment of your life. The whole network doesn't fall. You neutralize the threat, or better yet, you convert them into an asset that feeds disinformation back to your competitors.
Are you seriously suggesting that a modern project manager should give 3 different fake project deadlines to 3 different team members just to see who leaks it to a rival department? That's not leadership. That's a toxic workplace lawsuit waiting to happen. Applying the trust vigilance cycle to your daily life is a recipe for a paralyzed existence. Let's look at the operational reality of that mindset by examining the dynamics on the Eastern Front. When you have an environment defined by pervasive fear, internal purges, and overlapping agencies like the Soviet NKVD or the German Abwehr secret police, you don't get efficiency. You get a system where ideological scrutiny and the fear of your own side become as paralyzing as a threat from the enemy. If you are constantly setting canary traps for your colleagues and running behavioral pattern recognition on your friends, you destroy genuine collaboration. The moral ambiguity of dealing with people as potential traitors creates the very betrayals you're trying to prevent.
You're equating structural vigilance with genocidal, totalitarian paranoia, and those are 2 completely different things. The trust vigilance cycle isn't about arbitrary purges. It's about objective risk management. It is simply acknowledging that in high-stakes environments, unverified trust is a vulnerability. The Eastern Front intelligence apparatus failed because it prioritized ideological dogma and political terror over empirical evidence. A properly implemented trust vigilance cycle is entirely empirical. It relies on cross-referencing information and post-action reviews. It allows you to delegate autonomously, just as Virginia Hall did with her Heckler and Saint networks. Those were decentralized French resistance circuits where if one member was captured, they literally didn't know enough to bring down the whole operation. You can empower your team with absolute autonomy because you know the blast radius of a potential betrayal is contained. You can't achieve that level of operational reach if you are terrified of a single point of failure bringing down your entire enterprise.
But relying on that empirical approach requires treating human interactions purely as data streams. To run those networks, you have to emotionally detach from the people in them. And that leads directly to problem solving via the Bletchley Park model, or what we're calling ghost in the machine methods. This is the application of signals intelligence frameworks to daily complex challenges. It involves systemic pattern recognition, iterative hypothesis testing, and the application of statistical analysis to human behavior.
And it is arguably the most powerful intellectual framework available to us today. The Bletchley Park codebreakers taught us to look at human behavior in competitive markets not as unpredictable chaos, but as interconnected systems with structural weaknesses. By assembling radically diverse expertise, not just industry insiders, but people who think completely differently, like linguists, chess masters, or crossword enthusiasts, you can crack the codes of your competitors. You use traffic analysis.
Wait, just to clarify for the listener, you're talking about studying the patterns of communication rather than the actual content itself?
Exactly. You don't even need to know exactly what your competitors are saying. It's who is talking to whom and when. If a rival tech company suddenly has a massive spike in communications with a specific external legal firm, you don't need to read their highly encrypted emails to know an acquisition or a lawsuit is likely happening. You use cribs, which in cryptography are educated guesses based on known predictable behaviors or routines, to test your hypotheses. When you apply this level of systemic thinking and technological augmentation to your industry, you gain an almost clairvoyant strategic advantage. You anticipate their moves before they even make them because you understand the underlying architecture of their behavior.
I appreciate the intellectual rigor of that model, but the human application is where it completely falls apart for me. So we're supposed to treat every human interaction, every market fluctuation, as a known plain text attack. In cryptography, that's where you compare a known piece of information to an encrypted message to crack the whole system. You are proposing we do that to people. Doing so strips away the humanity of the individuals you are analyzing and interacting with. It reduces complex emotional beings to ciphertexts that just need to be broken. Furthermore, the psychological endurance required to maintain that level of constant, intense decryption of your environment is something most people simply cannot sustain. Look at the historical record of the codebreakers themselves. The profound isolation of living in a world where you are constantly sifting for anomalies broke many of them. It is an incredibly alienating way you experience the world.
That is the price of an unparalleled advantage. You call it alienating, I call it achieving absolute clarity. In a fiercely competitive environment, empathy can actually be a cognitive bias. It can blind you to an adversary's true intentions because you project your own rationalizations onto them. By elevating your perspective to systems analysis, you remove the emotional noise that causes most strategic failures. You are no longer reacting angrily to a competitor's aggressive posture. You are calmly analyzing their resource allocation patterns. It isn't about stripping away humanity. It's about understanding the mechanics of human behavior so precisely that you are never caught off guard. You see the machinery beneath the surface.
If you're already treating people as predictable systems to be hacked, I suppose the next logical step is actively feeding them false data, which brings us right to the ultimate application of understanding human behavior: strategic deception. You are arguing that crafting highly detailed, fabricated narratives to leverage an adversary's confirmation bias, specifically the Operation Mincemeat model, is the ultimate force multiplier in our professional lives.
Without question, strategic deception is how you win massive victories with minimal resources. Look at the sheer brilliance of the mincemeat framework. It isn't just about telling a lie, it is about constructing a comprehensive, multi-layered reality. British intelligence created a fictional officer, Major William Martin, out of a deceased individual. They didn't just give him fake operational documents, they give him pocket litter, love letters, overdraft notices from his bank, theater tickets. They understood that the target, in this case, Hitler's high command, had a tendency to micromanage and a pre-existing suspicion about Allied intentions in Greece and Sardinia. They fed the target exactly what they wanted to believe, delivered through a mechanism that appeared entirely accidental and beyond suspicion.
Right, a body washing ashore in Spain.
Exactly. Now let's map this onto a modern corporate battle. It means creating a believable narrative that plays directly into your competitor's confirmation bias. You leave a trail of circumstantial evidence. Maybe it's a dummy project. Maybe it's a meticulously crafted false trail of job postings for software engineers in a coding language you have no intention of using. It leads your competitor to redirect their massive resources away from your true objective because they think they've uncovered your secret roadmap. It is brilliant because it uses their own psychological tendencies and their own internal intelligence gathering apparatus against them.
You're talking about the tactical upside, but you're completely ignoring the fallout. What happens when the deception fails? The mincemeat proposal is a high-stakes gamble that requires uncontrollable factors to align perfectly. Historically, the body had to wash ashore in exactly the right place. The local authorities had to hand the documents over to the Abwehr. The German intelligence apparatus had to swallow the bait without catching a single flaw in the forgery. In real life, modern environments have significantly more variables and aggressive verification tools. If you attempt a mincemeat-style deception in your industry, say setting up shell companies or dummy projects, and it is uncovered, the consequences are catastrophic. Being caught in an elaborate, premeditated fabrication doesn't just cost you a single deal, it permanently destroys your credibility. Investors pull their funding because you look erratic and untrustworthy. You become a known bad actor. The risk-to-reward ratio is incredibly skewed against you.
You're focusing entirely on the risk of the lie collapsing, but you're ignoring the guaranteed cost of doing nothing, or the cost of competing transparently. Yes, strategic deception carries risk, but it is a managed risk. You meticulously plan for contingencies. The mincemeat planners knew it was a gamble, but the alternative was a direct, head-on assault on Sicily that would have resulted in devastating casualties. In business, the alternative to strategic deception is often a brutal price war or a direct clash of resources where the deeper pockets always win. Deception allows the smaller, more agile player to punch massively above their weight. You aren't just gambling blindly. You are exploiting the specific cognitive biases of your target. When executed with rigorous, internal consistency and a plausible delivery mechanism, the target's own arrogance does the heavy lifting for you. They convince themselves the fake intelligence is real because they want it to be real.
But you are assuming flawless execution in a vacuum. You are assuming that the internal vigilance required to maintain that elaborate lie doesn't bleed back into your own organization. The architecture of a deception requires continuous, exhausting maintenance. If your team knows you're capable of orchestrating a deeply complex, cynical deception against a competitor, they must inevitably wonder if you are utilizing the trust-vigilance cycle against them. It creates a culture of paranoia within your own ranks. We keep coming back to this core tension, the undeniable tactical brilliance of these methods versus the profound, often hidden cost to the individual and the organization. You might win the contract, but you shatter the psychological safety of your own team in the process.
The costs are real, I won't deny that, but they are the necessary friction of high-level survival. The frameworks we've discussed today, decentralized networks, cognitive exploitation, and the psychological fortitude required to maintain an adaptive identity, are a must-try framework for anyone navigating a highly competitive, high-stakes environment where survival and efficiency are paramount. The Silent Front Toolkit is not for the faint of heart. It requires immense discipline and a willingness to view the world through a fiercely analytical lens. But it is undeniably effective for those who master it.
And I maintain that these methods must be approached with extreme caution. While they are tactically brilliant, utilizing the Silent Front Toolkit requires a profound personal sacrifice. You risk chronic paranoia, isolation, and a psychological toll that outlasts any short-term professional victory. It is one thing to win, it is another to survive the victory with your humanity intact.
That tension is exactly why these strategies are so fascinating to debate.
Absolutely. Ultimately, analyzing these strategies through the intense lens of historical espionage forces us to weigh the true cost of our ambitions. We will leave it to you, the listener, to act as the ultimate critical filter. There's much more to explore in the Silent Front regarding the absolute limits of human endurance and the architecture of secrecy. Thank you for joining us for this intellectual exchange. Until next time.